So who are the offenses that you're targeting, Dan?
Yeah, so I wanted to look at this as like offenses to target, offenses to avoid. So the first offense, and based on value, I think that's the fun way to do it. Like we can talk about the Chiefs and Eagles, Adam. I think everybody's targeting players from those offenses, so I'm going to go a little bit beyond that. So the first one that really stands out to me as an offense I'm targeting, and I knew I was going to target this offense the whole offseason, Adam. And obviously now the ADPs are kind of catching up, so it's not as good value. But the Cleveland Browns offense to me is the clear-cut best offense to target in fantasy this year based on value. So let me get into a few reasons, but start with something that I mentioned earlier that I really do put a good amount of weight on, and that's Dave Richards' projected strength of schedule. Because again, he's using different factors to come up with this. It's not just the typical strength of schedule. He's using things like Pro Football Focus grades, advanced stats, things of that nature. And according to Dave, the Browns have the fifth easiest schedule, projected strength schedule for quarterbacks, eighth easiest for running backs, fifth easiest for receivers, third easiest for tight ends. Really all in a good spot across the board there from a scheduling standpoint, and from an opponent standpoint. Reasons I like this offense beyond that: Deshaun Watson in year 2, they did everything, in my opinion, that they should do to make him have a chance to really get back to that form we saw in Houston. For starters, they put 2 new weapons around him, both of who I love. The first is Eli Moore, a player whose film at Ole Miss was as good as any receiver, really most receivers in the majority receivers in the last 2 draft classes. Didn't work out in the Jets, played a lot with Zach Wilson. Open rate was still really good for him. He even had a big stretch during his rookie season where he looked like a fantasy stud. He's going to provide something different for that Browns offense: speed and the ability to create open separation early in the routes. Then you got Cedric Tillman, who can run the vertical plane as well as anyone I saw in last year's draft class. He's a rookie, so don't expect too much there, but he's a big-bodied vertical threat that's going to also work well with Deshaun Watson. Reminds me a lot of when they brought in, gave him Will Fuller over there and different weapons in Houston that can get open on the vertical plane, and that's really where Deshaun Watson in Houston really impressed me the most, just that ability to throw with anticipation and accuracy on the vertical plane. So I like that. I like the changes they've made just on the offensive line. They've provided some upgrades there. They're going to get healthier there. Stefanski's back, and I think he has that run-first reputation, but I think this offense is transitioning to a pass-first offense, so you kind of get year 1 of that where, the whole fantasy community knows them one way, the Browns, is this run-first team, and they might be a little bit different this year. So there's a lot to like for me with Cleveland, but some of my favorite late-round flyers are Eli Moore and Cedric Tillman. Nick Chubb, who we're going to talk about a little bit later because I saw it in the email, is one of my favorite targets at running back. I just got him in the Scott Fishbowl as well. And then Deshaun Watson's probably my favorite value at quarterback. And even, if you're looking late at tight end and you kind of skip the position, David Njoku is kind of interesting as well from that standpoint too, because Deshaun Watson has found some success with some really, really bad tight ends during his time in Houston. You look at some of the guys that he made somewhat fantasy relevant, at least for like flyer type pickups. And these are guys who are not even in the NFL anymore. So I really like this offense. That's the first one for me, Adam.
That was one of mine. I mean, I'll let you kind of go into this. This is the segment that you came up with. But the 4 that I highlighted of value offenses, because like you said, it's not just about the best offenses. It's about the ones where we can find some value in drafts. Cleveland was certainly one of them. I will say, obviously, Denver for me. I've talked about that every day. I'll say Dallas, because I think Pollard in late 2nd or 3rd round is I think unbelievable value. I drafted him 11th overall in one league. I consider him a star, a potential star. I could consider him a stud. Lamb is fine, but Dak Prescott, he's pretty overlooked. And, he didn't really have that great of a year last year, and he was still a top 10 quarterback per game. So I don't think he's going to win you the league, but he has shown the ability to throw for close to 5,000 yards. And again, I don't think that's happening, but I think he's a fine pick. So there's Dak, and then there's Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks is maybe done, but he's going pretty late, and I do think he's good value. And then who knows? Maybe there's a tight end that emerges there. They usually get the tight ends pretty involved. So Dallas is one, Denver is one, Cleveland is one, and Jacksonville. Jacksonville will probably be my favorite. They don't have a single player right now going in the first 3 rounds, but then in the 4th round, you got to get aggressive with Jacksonville. That's when Etienne, Ridley, and Trevor Lawrence, according to NFC ADP, are all coming off the board. I think Lawrence probably goes a little bit later than that in a typical draft, but I think that's fine. I think Kirk can be good. I think Ingram can be fine, but I just see this offense having a real chance to blow up. And Doug Peterson, they were only 16th in plays last year, but in his 5 years in Philadelphia, They were third, eighth, first, and sixth in plays.
And it
So
stands to reason that in year 2 of the system, they'll feel more comfortable using more tempo.
yeah, and I think, I wish their left tackle weren't suspended for 6 games.
Me too.
But the arrow's pointing up for Jacksonville, and the value's good. All right, who else do you like?
All right, a few more offenses I like. Let's start with the Lions here. The Lions are definitely an offense I'm looking to target a lot of going into the season. For starters, I'm a big believer, if you've heard me on this podcast, in the offensive coordinator and the role that the play calling and play design plays in fantasy football success. And Ben Johnson, to me, is as good as it gets. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 other guys, obviously Andy Reid, that I would take over him, and a few others maybe. But the way that offense was cooking at the end of last year, I think it carries right over. There's no concerns. The offensive line, it remains elite. Young players as well in that offensive line that could grow into even better players. Like I don't know if I've seen the best of Penei Sewell. I don't think I have. I think that comes this year. Even Frank Ragnow is a pretty young player there, probably the best center in the NFL or one of the 3 best there. So I really like the offensive line situation. I like adding Jameson Williams. The speed, obviously, we have to miss the 6 games, but then he comes back into the mix there. Jahmyr Gibbs as well adds a speed element to that offense and gives them the ability to do something they tried to do a little bit of last year, which is get the running backs involved in the passing game. But obviously, DeAndre Swift made that difficult with the injuries and the inconsistencies. This year, that could potentially be different. And they've even mentioned, I think it was I don't think it was Ben Johnson, but it might have been him who mentioned that even David Montgomery, they feel like offers a little bit more in the passing game than somebody like Jamal Williams that they had last year. So I think that could really unlock the offense as well. So Lions are definitely an offense I'm targeting. I like Goff at his ADP. Gibbs is interesting to me, but I love David Montgomery at his ADP. And Amon-Ra St. Brown to me is still one of the best targets in fantasy. Obviously, I had a huge amount of shares of him last year. You have to pay a much bigger premium this year for him, but I don't really see why you don't pay it because you're getting locked in my opinion, 140 plus targets if he stays healthy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put the Lions in there.
I don't like him ahead of Davante Adams, though, and that's currently happening in a lot of
I do like him ahead of Davante Adams, but why? So I guess track record is probably the reason you don't like that happening.
It's not even close. I mean, you have to really look. It could obviously happen, especially if Garoppolo's arm falls apart or something like that. But like Davante Adams is Davante Adams, for God's sake. He's a Hall of Famer. Amon-Ra St. Brown is not he's extremely short area target. Wants to go downfield a little bit more this year, but I don't know if that's how he's going to be used. Doesn't do a lot after the catch, doesn't score touchdowns. I'm not trying to trash Amon-Ra St. Brown, but it feels like overthinking it to me to take him ahead of Davante Adams. Although I think you can make the case that St. Brown is safer than Davante Adams. But the only format that I would even consider it is PPR. If it's non or half PPR, I think you got to go Adams. But I just feel like even in a terrible quarterback situation, Adams is still going to be good.
It's fair, especially because I feel like if I don't listen to your advice on that, Adam, I'm making the same mistake I made last year with a player like Adam. I really did not expect that Raiders offense to move the ball last year very often, and they did. And I think some of the credit belongs to Josh McDaniels, who's still there. I know he takes a lot of crap, but he still is a good play designer, and he still is a good play caller. And so if that's the case, I feel a little bit more confident. I just have so many, and we even saw it with Jarrett Stidham when he played a little bit. The offense still moved the ball. Devontae Adams was still productive. I just have a weird bias, I guess, against Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't see it happening for him.
He knows, he's familiar with the system, and
familiar with the system. That's a good thing.
Mac Jones was actually putting up decent numbers for a young quarterback in his first 2 seasons, and I think it was Chris Trapasso who's breaking down all of the young quarterbacks on our website, and he either said on this show or he wrote in an article, he wasn't really buying Mac Jones because he felt like Josh McDaniels was the reason behind the stats, basically. And you're right. Josh McDaniels deserves more credit than he gets as a play caller, play designer. He's done good stuff, and I think that's worth noting.
And to be fair,
another team. Yeah, because we're running out of time here. We got to get to our emails and our Apple Podcast.
Yep. So let's do one more team that wasn't on the list. For me, it's not any big surprise, but I know a lot of people kind of feel like it's a math equation that's hard to solve, so they don't want to take these players, but I'm targeting a lot of 49ers again this year. One thing I really love about the 49ers going into this year, this is the easiest schedule they've faced in a long time. According to Dave's projected strength of schedule, we've got the 7th easiest schedule for quarterbacks, 9th easiest running backs, 7th easiest receivers, 9th easiest tight ends. So I feel like that's going to make things a lot more fluid for them from an offensive standpoint, a lot more consistent there. And so, you look at some of these players. Brandon Ayuk is a player who I love at ADP. Debo Samuel is a player who I think his ADP is depressed. I'm not so sure that there's
Not
good
that
reason.
it's not that depressed. He's a solid third, maybe
But
sneaks into the 4th round guy.
That's pretty depressed for where he was at. I know there's an issue with
Yeah,
targets there,
it was
but
something that we nailed last year. We called him a bust.
right.
And you know what? We're going to get into this later.
Okay.
Really interesting, the Ayuk versus Debo stuff. Summary, over the last year and a half, Ayuk has been decidedly better as a receiver. But Brock Purdy appears to be a much better fit for Debo Samuel. So anyway, that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for 49ers, that was kind of it there. And then the final team that I'm looking to target would be another team that's obviously one of the better teams, but I really like some of the values ADP wise for the Bills this year. The 3 specific ones for me are James Cook, who I don't understand why he's still going so late. I get it. They said they signed Damian Harris, but James Cook looks so good down the stretch. And everything I saw on tape from him at Georgia told me that he could be a really good in between the tackles runner. He's the same thing his brother Dalvin has. It's those vision cuts, it's that ability to see the cutback lanes. It's an innate ability that I don't think all running backs have. I think he has it. I'm going to stick with that. Dalton Kincaid, I mentioned him earlier, but I love Dalton Kincaid as one of my favorite tight end flyers. Look, everyone's going to bank on this idea that tight ends as rookies don't produce, but very few, again, were first-round picks with the kind of talent Kincaid has and the quarterback that he has attached to him. And then finally, Gabe Davis, who you mentioned earlier. You can get him at such a discount this year, Gabe Davis, and I still think you're likely to get really good snap shares from him in this Bills offense, which is big. And more importantly, he might be healthy for the whole year, which would give him a better chance, in my opinion, to produce on a consistent basis. So I think you're getting good value with all 3 of those players.
Well, I'm one pick away from getting Gabe Davis and Scott Fish.
Okay.
So
Nice.
let's hope.